When Aram entered his room, he found the girl sitting on his bed. From the very moment his eyes fell on her, it was unmistakably clear that she was overwhelmed with fear, a terror so deep that it seemed to have taken over her entire being. Although her eyes trembled and her hands fidgeted nervously, there was something about her expression that Aram, with his trained medical eye, instantly recognized. Being a doctor, he could read the state of a person from the subtlest of cues, and he knew exactly what was amiss. With a tone that mixed both assurance and an unsettling nonchalance, he said, "There is no reason to be so frightened. Tonight is the night of your dreams. Though you are young and innocent, you have dreamed grand dreams, and tonight, one of those dreams will come true." His voice, smooth yet edged with a peculiar command, left no room for protest. Even as he reached out his hand toward her, the gesture that had once been the very symbol of care and affection in her childhood, she shrank back as if repelled by its very presence. Her reaction was as if she were witnessing something utterly alien, a response that echoed in the silent room with a mix of sorrow and disbelief. "Why are you acting like this?" Aram inquired, a note of irritation creeping into his voice. "As far back as I remember, you have always been sensible and kind, never one to lose your head over trifles, and yet tonight you have become my wife, something I never imagined I would ever agree to with a girl like you. Tell me, what could be so fearful about this moment?" He continued, almost as if trying to convince both himself and her. "Look, take my hand. This is the very hand that once belonged to the one for whom you yearn so deeply. Today, everything belongs to you. So why do you still wear the mask of terror on your face?" Giti, whose name she was known by now, understood all too clearly what was unfolding. In her heart, she knew that what shone in Aram's eyes was not love. Rather, it was a complex cocktail of obligation, authority, and, if one dared to call it, a cold calculation. She also understood with a sinking realization that today, any hope of receiving warmth or compassion from him was entirely out of the question. The fear that had haunted her for so long was now becoming a tangible reality. Earlier that morning, Getty had been at the hospital, a place that had been the backdrop to so many of her troubled memories. It was Aram who had brought her there, escorting her to the very hospital where he worked. In that sterile, cold environment, where the faint beeping of machines mingled with hushed conversations, Getty was treated by one of Aram's close friends, a competent lady doctor whose calm yet firm demeanor had helped her through the crisis. Now she sat silently before Aram, her eyes searching his face, as though she were trying to find some remnant of the man she once admired. But there was a strange disconnect in her gaze, a look that conveyed she was seeing him for the very first time, as if the man she thought she knew was now a complete stranger. Arham, meanwhile, was casually occupied with his tea. His manner was nonchalant, almost careless, as he sipped and muttered, "Why are you looking at me like that? Is it as though you're seeing me for the very first time?" His voice carried the lightness of a man unconcerned with the gravity of the moment, though his words belied the storm that churned silently beneath the surface. At that moment, Dr. Azmi, a longtime friend and colleague of Arham, interjected with a voice tinged with disbelief and reproach. "It seems you really are looking at him as if it were your first encounter, even though I have always known you to be courteous and kind. So tell me, why did you treat this girl so callously? From what I know, she is your wife now, and you should have taken her age and fragility into account. What were you thinking? Were you intoxicated or something?" The sharpness of Dr. Azmi's tone was enough to make even Arham's eyes flash with anger. "I do not drink," Arham snapped, his voice rising. "You wouldn't treat any girl, let alone your own wife, in this manner." His words were laced with a bitterness that left no room for further debate, and Dr. Azmi's expression turned equally stern, as though the very idea of the situation was intolerable. In that charged atmosphere, the conversation turned from mild reproach to a deeper, darker revelation of the night's unfolding events. Arham's tone grew harsher as he continued. "You have no idea how this girl came into my life. If you truly understood her background, you might not even consider helping her now." There was an edge of loathing in his voice, a detachment that came not just from disdain, but from a deeper, unspoken secret that he was desperate to keep hidden. Dr. Osmi's eyes narrowed as he pressed on. Then tell me, how exactly did she become part of your life? Surely there must be more to this than what meets the eye. But before Aram could fully respond, his anger boiled over, and he declared in a tone that brooked no argument, I do not indulge in any vices, and I would never treat any woman, even one who is supposed to be my wife, in such a demeaning way. His words cut through the silence like a blade, leaving the room momentarily paralyzed. It was at this juncture that Arham's voice dropped to a menacing murmur as he spoke of the inexplicable circumstances surrounding Giti's presence in his life. You have no idea, he confessed bitterly, of the trials and tragedies that have led her here. There are things in my past that you wouldn't understand, even if I told you. His eyes, cold and determined, betrayed nothing of the internal conflict that was raging within him. Dr. Osmi, visibly perturbed, tried to coax some explanation out of him. Then explain to me, how did she come into your life, he implored, his tone softening slightly as he attempted to bridge the chasm between professional concern and personal inquiry. But Arham, clearly unwilling to delve into the painful details, merely stated, now is not the time for that discussion. What matters is that she must recover soon. I must take her home as soon as possible. Dr. Osmi frowned. But she is not willing to go with you, he said quietly. She keeps insisting that she be removed from here entirely, as if she were to vanish from this world. And she swears with all her heart that she will never return with you. How can that be? Aram's eyes flashed with a mix of irritation and determination. Don't worry about it, he replied in a tone that brooked no further argument. Keep her here until evening. Once it's dark, I will take her away. And if you are eager to see her again, then do not trouble yourself. She will be here until then. With that curt instruction, he turned away, leaving Dr. Osmi to grapple with the implications of his words. For a long moment, Dr. Osmi clutched his head in despair, wondering what had truly possessed this man to behave so callously. After leaving that heated conversation behind, Arham's thoughts drifted back to a time long past, a time when life had been simpler, or so he had believed. He recalled the days when he had visited the modest guest house at the home of Gati's grandmother, Samira Bibi. The invitation had been extended with the promise of a vacant portion of land on an upper floor, and the arrangement was presented as a mutually beneficial deal. Samira Bibi's words had been full of hope and generosity. She needed money, and they needed a place to live, so they would rent out the space. In that unassuming setting, Arham had found solace and acceptance. He had been the youngest among his brothers, often overlooked by his own parents, who had never truly valued his ambitions when he declared his wish to become a doctor and move to the city. Life, however, had a way of twisting fate. His family had been staunch landowners, and when he had chosen a path that diverged from the expectations of his kin, he was labeled a rebel, a dissenter destined to handle the land someday, but not to follow his own dreams. It was in that context that Arham's life had taken shape. He had established a small clinic on the upper floor of a modest building, and in the quiet hours of the evening, he would sit there lost in thought, while during the day he worked tirelessly in the hospital. Then one fateful day, Giti had come to him with a minor injury. I hurt my hand while playing, she had explained in a timid voice. Arham, ever the dutiful doctor, had immediately set about bandaging her hand. It was in that moment, a time when a doctor's careful ministration should have conveyed care and tenderness, that Gati first discovered the hidden depths of her feelings. In her innocent eyes, a spark had ignited, a spark of love that soon grew into a consuming passion. Later that day, Arham had been standing on the terrace of his modest dwelling, while Gati sat alone in the garden. The sunlight played upon his features, and though he tried to enjoy the serene environment with a casual sip of tea, his eyes kept darting back to her. Gaiety, for her part, was not merely a patient. She was a mystery, an enigma that she herself did not fully understand. She had a habit of deliberately cutting her hand with a small piece of glass or razor, as if to remind herself of the pain that love could inflict. Arham, noticing this disturbing behavior, was forced to confront the unsettling truth. Here was a young girl who, despite her delicate frame and gentle demeanor, was capable of inflicting self-harm, and all the while her inner heart beat with an intensity that both frightened and fascinated him. After some time, Giti vanished from sight. Moments later, the door to Aram's room suddenly rang. When he opened it, Giti was standing there with a look of pain resignation, her hand bandaged once more. "Doctor," she murmured, "I have hurt myself again. Please, bandage my wound." Arham's heart sank as he saw the marks of her recurring injury, the very marks that she had inflicted upon herself so often. He began to wrap her wound, his touch gentle despite the tension in the room. "Lately you seem to be getting hurt all the time," he remarked quietly, almost as if it were a casual observation rather than a call for help. "Why do you not take better care of yourself?" Giti's response was laced with a mixture of resignation and bitter humor. "Care is such an abstract notion," she replied softly. "It seems that when someone else takes care of me, everything feels right, even if it is only a temporary patch over the wound." Her eyes, meeting his for a fleeting moment, hinted at secrets and unspoken desires that were as elusive as they were painful. As the evening shadows began to lengthen, Arham's tone shifted once more, becoming more insistent. "Tonight," he declared, "I will speak to you in a manner that you cannot ignore. Tonight I will make you understand that everything belongs to you, and that includes my very presence." His words, spoken with a mix of finality and authority, were meant to dispel the lingering fear from her eyes, yet they only deepened the complexity of the emotions that swirled between them. In a later conversation that night, the atmosphere grew even more charged. Arham, now more forthright and perhaps even domineering, picked up his phone and began speaking loudly. So loudly, in fact, that the words seemed to echo off the walls, carried along by the humid air. "Listen up," he called out with booming clarity. "Tonight we shall meet, and tonight the date for our wedding will be set. I have long declared that you are the only one I love. There is no one else, no one to rival the passion I feel for you." The intensity in his voice was such that every syllable reverberated with an urgency that left Giti momentarily stunned. Unbeknownst to him, however, her ears caught every word. When Aram glanced over his shoulder, he saw that Gaiety had already slipped away into the cool embrace of the garden, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. Soon after, he discovered her sitting alone in the garden, her face hidden behind damp strands of hair, as she wept softly. Although Arham felt a twinge of regret at the sight of her sorrow, he was equally determined to assert his authority. "A moment's terror is worth more than a lifetime of regret," he mused to himself, rationalizing that the brief outpouring of emotion would soon give way to acceptance. Arham took pride in the way he had educated her through his words, believing that he had done the right thing by forcing her to confront a destiny that she had never truly chosen for herself. Yet beneath the surface, his mind was a turbulent sea of conflicting emotions. He recalled all too well the times when he had first met Gaiety, a meeting that had occurred under the most unexpected circumstances. At that time, she had been nothing more than a vulnerable girl, a stray soul wandering through the corridors of a humble guest house. Over time, as her affection grew and her actions became more self-destructive, Arham had found himself both drawn to her and repelled by her intensity. Her persistent attempts to capture his attention had always struck him as both touching and, in some ways, maddening. For him, the complications of their relationship were compounded by the fact that his heart already belonged to another. He had long been engaged to a woman named Sana, a gentle, caring soul with whom he had planned to share his future. Their engagement had been arranged with the hope of building a life together, one that was meant to be filled with promise and love. Sana had never openly confessed the depth of her feelings for him. Instead, she had carried herself with a quiet dignity that left little room for overt declarations of passion. Yet it was clear to all who knew them that there existed a profound bond between them, a bond that, despite its inherent complications, had once seemed unbreakable. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. In the midst of all these intricacies, Gaity's persistent presence had thrown Arham into a state of turmoil. He found himself battling with a sense of duty on one hand and an inexplicable, almost resentful desire on the other. This inner conflict was something he had long tried to ignore, but on this particular night, it surged forth with a violent insistence. "I have already planned this wedding," he would later insist, "and even if you have forced my hand by your actions, I shall not be swayed by sentiment." I will remain true to my duty. And yet in his heart, a cold resolve began to form, a resolve that had little to do with love and everything to do with control. The following day brought no relief from the emotional storm. In the early hours of the morning, Geti was rushed to the hospital once again, this time not by her own volition, but by Arham himself. The same hospital where he worked, and where a close friend of his, a kind and efficient lady doctor, had treated her earlier, now became the stage for another unfolding drama. In the sterile corridors of that institution, Geti sat across from Arham, while the lady doctor watched on, her eyes reflecting a mixture of pity and professional detachment. It was as though she were witnessing a scene that belonged to a different world, a world where the rules of love, duty, and human decency were turned upside down. During a brief moment of respite from the chaos, Arham, ever the man of conviction and authority, began explaining his plans in a tone that brooked no disagreement. "I will keep her here until the evening," he stated, his voice carrying the weight of finality. "Once night falls, I will take her with me. If any of you wish to see her again, you may wait until then, but understand that she will not be leaving until I say so." His words, delivered with the precision of a man who had rehearsed them countless times, left no room for dissent. Dr. Azmi, though still visibly disturbed by the unfolding events, could only nod in resignation. As the hours passed, Arham found himself lost in recollection, memories of a past where every decision, every misstep, and every moment of joy had contributed to the tangled web that now defined his life. He recalled the day he had first met Geti at Samira Bibi's modest guest house. The old matriarch had explained that there was a vacant upper floor that needed to be rented out, a necessity born out of financial need. "There is space available on the upper portion of our house," she had said, in a soft, matter-of-fact tone. "We need money, and we have decided to rent it out." At that time, Arham had been enchanted by her sincerity, even though the arrangement was far from ideal. His family, deeply rooted in the traditions of land ownership, had never fully supported his dreams of becoming a doctor or pursuing life in the city. Instead, they had expected him to conform to the family's legacy, a legacy that he increasingly found suffocating. It was in that very environment that Geti's path had crossed his. Initially, he had regarded her as merely a transient presence, a young girl with no substantial bearing on his future. However, as the days turned into weeks, her persistent attempts to capture his attention, combined with her strangely self-destructive tendencies, began to stir something within him. Even as he treated her injuries and bandaged her wounds, he could not shake the feeling that she represented a challenge to his carefully constructed world, a challenge that he neither welcomed nor completely rejected. The dynamics of their relationship continued to shift as days passed. Geti, with her innocent vulnerability and unexplained bursts of self-inflicted pain, became an enigma that Arham struggled to understand. There were times when she would sit quietly, her eyes distant and haunted, as if trying to escape from an inner turmoil that she could not articulate. In such moments, Arham would feel a pang of sympathy, a fleeting reminder of the compassion he once held. Yet, almost as quickly, that sympathy would be replaced by a steely resolve. He had already made up his mind about their future, and no amount of pleading or sorrow from her could alter the path he had chosen. One rainy evening, the tension reached its peak. The heavens opened up, and the relentless downpour seemed to mirror the emotional tempest inside Arham's heart. At that time, Geti appeared at his door again, soaked, trembling, and with a look that combined both desperation and defiance. "Doctor," she said softly, "I've hurt myself again. Please, bandage my wound." There was something in her tone, a mixture of resignation and a silent plea, that made Arham hesitate for just a moment. But then, as if driven by an unseen force, he swiftly began to wrap her injured hand with care, though his touch was mechanical and his eyes distant. "You are always getting hurt," he remarked with a note of reproach. "Why do you not take better care of yourself?" Her reply was laced with a sort of resigned irony. "I do try," she murmured, "but care is something that seems to slip away when you have no one to hold on to it. When someone else takes care of me, even if only momentarily, it gives me a sense of being whole." For a brief moment, their eyes met. In that glance lay an unspoken conversation, a collision of hope and despair, tenderness and hard-edged resolve. Later that night, when the clock's steady ticking filled the silence of the room, Aram's demeanor grew colder. He spoke in a tone that was both commanding and final. "I have made my decision. By tonight, all that is meant for you will be yours, and you will no longer be in doubt." His words were not soft, but delivered with the finality of a judge pronouncing a sentence. And though Gaety's heart ached with the knowledge that nothing would change, there remained a spark of defiance, a small ember that refused to be extinguished, even as the weight of the moment threatened to crush her spirit. In a startling moment of confrontation later, Arham's voice resonated over the phone. Though he had not actually made any calls, his voice was projected loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. "You are the love of my life," he proclaimed in a tone that bordered on a theatrical performance. "Today we shall meet, and today the date for our wedding will be fixed forever. I have always declared my affection for you, and now I mean every word." His declarations were meant to be heard by all, a public affirmation of a commitment that was anything but tender. Unbeknownst to him, his voice carried far beyond the confines of his room. Outside, in the dim light of the evening, Gaety heard every word. As soon as she realized what was happening, she fled, her face a portrait of anguish and betrayal. A short while later, Arham discovered that she was sitting alone in the garden, tears streaming down her face like rain on a dusty window. Despite the storm raging outside, the storm inside him was no less turbulent, a conflict between the harshness of duty and the lingering vestiges of compassion. Sometimes, Arham thought bitterly, a single moment of tears is worth more than a lifetime of silent suffering. And in that thought, he found a justification, a cold rationalization that would allow him to proceed with his plans without remorse. He believed that in time she would come to understand that what he was doing was necessary, even if it meant sacrificing a part of the love that she so desperately clung to. Yet as the night wore on and the rain gradually subsided, a new day's responsibilities loomed ominously on the horizon. Arham had arranged, following a decision by the local neighborhood committee, for Gaety to be moved to his room, a room that was to serve as the symbol of their marriage. Though the union was formalized by law, there was no warmth in it, no spark of genuine affection from Arham's side. In his heart, he had already decided that Gaety would remain nothing more than a formality, a companion on paper, while his true affections remained locked away with Sana, the woman he had once vowed to love and cherish. In the early hours after the official wedding, as the events of the day melted into the quiet agony of the night, Arham found himself alone with his thoughts. He sat at his desk, surrounded by scattered papers and documents that bore testimony to a life filled with complicated choices and unfulfilled dreams. The steady tick of the clock in the silent room was the only sound that accompanied him as he pondered over the twists of fate that had led him to this very moment. He recalled vividly the day when he had first met Gaety at Samira Bibi's guest house, a meeting that had seemed insignificant at the time, but which over the years had grown into a labyrinth of emotions. Back then, she had been nothing more than a small, timid girl with no one to call her own. Over time, however, she had developed an infatuation for him, a deep and desperate longing that she could neither suppress nor fully understand. Despite his best efforts to remain detached, her persistent gestures and her quiet, almost painful expressions of affection had slowly chipped away at the walls he had built around his heart. As Arham sat there, his mind was haunted by the memories of a happier time, a time when he believed that love could be both gentle and transformative. But that time was long gone. The harsh realities of life, compounded by the responsibilities of a marriage that was forced upon him by fate and community pressure, had replaced those hopeful dreams with a bitter acceptance of a future devoid of genuine passion. The thoughts swirled in his mind like a relentless storm. Could he ever reconcile the demands of duty with the echoes of the love he had once known? Then, as if summoned by his inner turmoil, his phone buzzed with an incoming email. With a hesitant swipe, he opened it to find a message from Sana. The email was brief yet loaded with significance. "Arham, I am leaving without telling you in person. I know that if I had informed you earlier, you would have tried to stop me, and I could not bear to have my education disrupted by our wedding preparations. I am going away for 1 year to pursue an important medical course, a dream I have long cherished. I am certain that in my absence, you will handle everything. I love you dearly, and when I return, we will begin a new chapter in our lives. Yours, Sana. For a fleeting moment, Arham felt a sense of calm wash over him. The clarity of Sana's words brought him solace, but it was immediately marred by the pain of knowing that Sana had felt compelled to leave without confiding in him about the complex situation with Gati. He knew that if Sana ever discovered the full truth of the events that had transpired between him and Gati, she would never forgive him. In his heart, he whispered to himself, "Perhaps it is for the best. Without her here, she will never learn of these details, and by the time she returns, I shall have found a way out of this tangled mess." Following the directives of the neighborhood committee, Gati was now formally relocated to Aram's room. Though they were married in the eyes of society and law, the union was void of the love that one might expect. Arham's words to her were unambiguous as he declared, "Gati, let me be clear from the start. This marriage was not born of my own volition. You were deceived into it, and I will never accept you sided or face the repercussions. If you dare complain at your workplace, your career will be jeopardized as well." Their words were cold and final, delivered with the authority that only a tight-knit community could muster. In the midst of this heated exchange, Giti's grandmother, her sole remaining guardian, stepped forward. With a voice quivering with both grief and determination, she proclaimed, "This man has attempted to trample on the honor of my granddaughter. I will not allow such disgrace to pass unnoticed. You shall answer for your actions, and justice will be done in front of everyone." The gravity of her words sent ripples of shock throughout the assembly, as even the most hardened members of the committee could not ignore the painful truth laid bare before them. Arham, for his part, tried desperately to maintain his composure. "I insist on one final condition," he announced with a voice that barely concealed his inner turmoil. "I want to speak with Gati privately. After that, I will abide by your decision." The elders conferred briefly before signaling their assent, and Gati was beckoned to accompany him to a separate room, away from prying eyes and the accusing stares of the community. As soon as the door closed behind them, the tension between them escalated further. Arham's eyes burned with a combination of anger, frustration, and a deep-seated helplessness as he demanded, "Why are you doing all this, Gati? Why can't you simply accept what has been set in motion?" With a voice that was as cold as it was determined, Gati replied, "Because I cannot bear to see you belong to anyone else. I cannot, under any circumstances, watch you be taken by another." There was a ferocity in her tone, a spark of defiance that contradicted her earlier, more fragile demeanor. Arham took a deep breath before retorting, "You have no idea what you are doing. You are too young to truly comprehend the magnitude of what is at stake. My emotions burn too fiercely. They are beyond your control. If you continue down this path, I fear that your very spirit will be consumed by the fire of passion that you cannot possibly withstand." His words, though harsh, were laced with a warning, a stark premonition of the storm that was yet to come. Men, you see, often find their feelings overwhelming, and when a woman forcibly enters your life, you cannot simply allow her to take over your heart so easily. I may forgive your childish indiscretions, but I will never allow you to become the object of my obsession. There was a long silence as Giti stared deeply into his eyes, her own eyes shining with a mix of determination and vulnerability. After what seemed like an eternity, she spoke in a tone that was both tender and resolute. "I do not desire your hardened demeanor, Aram. I will win your heart with my love, and time will show that the coldness in you can be melted away by true affection." Her voice, soft yet unwavering, seemed to promise that, despite the bleakness of their present circumstances, hope might still find a way. For a few agonizing moments, neither spoke. Then, as if the weight of the unspoken future became too much to bear, Arham broke the silence. "Let us go outside," he said with finality. "My decision is made. What has been decided by all will be carried out." With that, they emerged from the room and rejoined the others. Gati's tear-streaked face contrasted sharply with Aram's impassive expression, a silent testimony to the chasm that now separated them. Before the assembly could question his next move, Aram's grandmother, the elderly matriarch who had once been the guiding light in Gati's life, addressed him with a trembling voice. "What is it that you have decided?" she asked softly, her eyes brimming with sorrow and the weight of years gone by. Arham, looking down with a mixture of regret and resolve, replied in a subdued tone, "I am ready to marry Giti." The words, uttered with reluctant finality, sent shockwaves through the gathered crowd. Gati's tears flowed even more freely at this pronouncement. Yet amid the sorrow, there was a faint glimmer of satisfaction on her face. The community, witnessing the formal commitment, began to prepare for the impending wedding, a ceremony that, though meant to be a joyous celebration, was tainted by a deep sense of inevitability and foreboding. Inside, Aram felt a profound inner turmoil. Though he had agreed to respect the formalities of this union, he had already resolved that he would never truly accept Gati as a partner in the full measure of his heart. Memories of Sana, the woman who had once been his promise, haunted him, twisting his thoughts into a labyrinth of regret and indecision. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Sana's face, her gentle smile, and the soft assurance in her eyes, a stark reminder of what might have been. In the days that followed, the wedding preparations moved forward with a mechanical inevitability. The neighborhood committee, ever vigilant and unyielding, oversaw every detail. Gayeti, despite her inner anguish, fulfilled her role with a stoic grace. She adorned herself in traditional attire and carefully applied henna, each stroke on her hand a silent testament to the vows she was about to make, even though her heart was already torn asunder. Arham, on the other hand, went through the motions of his responsibilities with a detached efficiency. Though he announced to everyone in the most straightforward manner, "This is my wife, the girl with whom I was forced to marry," his voice was devoid of any warmth or affection. He maintained a distance, both physical and emotional, making it clear that while Gati might share the household with him, she would never be allowed into the inner sanctum of his heart. The wedding night arrived with an eerie calm. The air was heavy with a mix of expectation and resignation. Giti, dressed in an exquisite red ensemble that symbolized both beauty and sacrifice, entered the room where the ceremony was to take place. In a hushed tone that barely concealed the tremor of her own emotions, Arham remarked, "You have the right to enter this room, but you must know that you will never enter my heart. Sleep wherever you wish, but keep your distance from me." Gayeti, with quiet determination, replied, "I have something that will bring you closer to me, something that will bridge the distance between us." For a fleeting moment, there was a spark of defiance in her eyes, a promise that someday, despite the cold indifference and the weight of circumstance, she would succeed in winning him over. In response, Aram's voice, low and resolute, carried a final, fateful warning. "Do you truly think that your love can melt the ice within me? I am not so easily swayed. Know this, no matter what, you will remain under my authority, for you are my wife, but you shall never claim dominion over my heart." And so, with those final words echoing in the dimly lit room, the night of their wedding passed with a hollow solemnity. The ceremony had been completed, and the lives of both Arham and Gati took a definitive turn. A turn toward a future that was destined to be marked by cold formality and unspoken resentments, the unyielding fate of a forced union. In the days that followed, life continued on with its relentless pace. Arham, caught in the crossfire of duty and discontent, found himself repeatedly revisiting memories of a happier past, a time when promises of love had once seemed attainable. Yet with every recollection, a shadow of regret grew larger, reminding him that his current reality was built on compromises he would forever rue. He spent many sleepless nights poring over old photographs and letters, trying to recapture a fleeting moment of warmth, only to find that every image was now tainted with bittersweet recollections. Giti, for her part, struggled silently with her own inner demons. Although she was officially the wife of a man whose affections lay elsewhere, she maintained a quiet dignity, a belief that someday her perseverance would yield the love she so desperately craved. Every day she attended to her duties in the household with measured grace, even as she silently hoped that the passage of time might soften the hardened edges of Aram's heart. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the world was cloaked in stillness, she would sit by the window and gaze at the sky, whispering promises to herself that one day she would change the course of their fate. Yet even as life trudged on in its relentless, unsympathetic manner, the undercurrents of passion, regret, and unfulfilled longing continued to swirl beneath the surface. Arham's mind was a battleground where the remnants of past dreams fought against the grim realities of his present obligations. Every time he saw Giti's tearful eyes, he was reminded of the cost of a decision made in haste, a decision that had condemned them both to a life of formality without true connection. One evening, as a gentle rain began to fall again, its soft patter a mournful accompaniment to the quiet despair in their hearts, Arham found himself alone in his study. He leafed through the pages of a dusty journal, trying to decipher the conflicting emotions that had plagued him for so long. The memories of a time when his heart had been open and his dreams unburdened by the constraints of duty flooded back. And for a brief moment, he allowed himself to feel the weight of his own vulnerability. Yet just as quickly, that vulnerability was supplanted by a hardened resolve. "I cannot let sentiment dictate my fate," he muttered to himself. "The world is unforgiving, and I must be stronger than the fleeting whispers of regret." But deep within him, there remained a hidden fissure, a small, unacknowledged hope that perhaps, one day, fate might reward him with a love he had long since buried under layers of obligation and bitterness. This inner conflict became a silent companion during long, lonely nights, a reminder that even in the midst of enforced formalities, the human heart could still harbor dreams of redemption and transformation. The days turned into weeks, and soon the wedding festivities were over. The new household settled into a routine that was both predictable and stifling. In the quiet corridors of their shared home, Getty would often catch glimpses of Aram lost in thought, his eyes distant and haunted by memories of a past that he could neither escape nor fully embrace. And though he never spoke a word of tenderness, his silence was a language in itself, a language that spoke of regret, of longing, and of a future that would never be what either of them had once hoped for. As time marched on, the community around them watched with a mixture of pity and stern judgment. Whispers and murmurs of disapproval accompanied every step they took together. Yet in the eyes of the neighborhood committee, the decision had been final. There was no reversing the course that had been set in motion, no undoing the events that had led to this somber union. The society that once promised compassion and understanding had now become an unyielding force, one that would ensure that the consequences of deceit and forced commitments were borne by those who dared to deviate from its rigid expectations. And so, as the calendar pages turned and days merged into nights, Arham and Giti continued to live out the terms of their marriage. There were moments, fleeting and rare, when a stray look or a quiet word hinted at the possibility of change. Giti's eyes, even in their tearful vulnerability, would sometimes flash with an intensity that suggested she believed in the transformative power of love. Arham, too, on occasion, would pause and watch her with an expression that mixed regret with a silent, unspoken promise. Yet for all the hope that lingered in the hidden corners of their hearts, the truth remained as unyielding as ever. The union was built on a foundation of compromise and coercion, not on the nurturing warmth of mutual affection. And then, on that fateful wedding night, a night that was to seal their destinies in a manner that neither could escape, the final words were spoken. In a voice that carried all the finality of their tragic arrangement, Arham declared, "This is my love, Giti. Your grandmother has bestowed upon me everything in her name, and now all of it is mine. This house, this wife, they shall all remain under my command." Epilogue. These final words, laden with both triumph and despair, encapsulate the bitter paradox of a life where duty overrides desire. The promise that had once been whispered in moments of fleeting tenderness now echoed as a decree that would forever bind Giti to a life where her own dreams and hopes would be overshadowed by the harsh realities of a forced union. In that single resonant statement lay the entirety of a broken promise and a future destined to be as cold and unyielding as the man who uttered it. What happens next in the story? If you want to watch the complete story, click on the video that appears on your screen and watch part 2. Subscribe for more videos